The next speaker is Dr. Pedro Alonso, Director of the Global Malaria Program at the World Health Organization, talking maybe about historical lessons and new strategies, but he's always a surprise, so we shall see.
Well, thank you very much. And first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to be speaking at this symposium that remembers our good friend and very much missed colleague, Alan McGill. So, as Bruno was speaking, I was getting slightly worried because these days we seem to have pre-breakfast meetings every morning at 7 in the morning, solidly, and as you will see from my talk, there seems to be not just that we share slides, but thoughts too. And so please bear with me on this. So a few comments on the past and where we're maybe going in the future. So as Bruno has alluded to, in 1955, the World Health Assembly that came together in Mexico City on that year launched the first global malaria eradication program. And the then Director General of WHO, Marcelino Candao, said, we have the tools, we know what needs to be done, and it is simply a matter of going out to do it. Well, it's always complicated to do this sort of historical revisionism and how wrong was he or how right he was. As Bruno was saying, they genuinely thought they had the tools. There was still highly effective DDT with its residual effect. There was chloroquine, safe, inexpensive, and highly effective. DDT, which the first signs of resistance had been identified a couple of years before that in Greece, as I said, was still highly effective and indeed did prompt a strong rationale for an accelerated effort towards elimination. So they did believe they did have the tools. They thought what needed to be done, and that's probably where they were most wrong. And as again Bruno has alluded to start with, they didn't know what to do in the highly endemic countries of Africa, and that's one of the reasons that not much actually happened in Africa during the eradication campaign. And the last sentence, that it was simply a matter of going out to do it, reflects what was perceived as this was an operational effort that needed to be done. It was a managerial one. Malaria was not seen as a problem to be solved. It was seen simply as a task to be performed. And that probably was not the right approach. 15, 14 years went by, the decrease in the funding into the special account, the lack of progress in Africa, where not much was attempted, the growing problem of both drug and insecticide resistance. Soon, probably by 1963 and 64, there was a recognition that this was not going to be achieved. And in the World Health Assembly in 1969, the campaign, the program, was brought to a halt. But I'd like to draw your attention on the actual wording contained in the World Health Assembly resolution of 1969, the one that is credited for stopping the eradication effort. And they said, quote, that complete eradication of malaria from the world remains a primary task of national public health organizations, and that even in the regions where eradication does not yet seem feasible, control of malaria with the means available should be encouraged and may be regarded as a necessary and valid step towards the ultimate goal of eradication. In other words, the World Health Assembly never gave up on the goal of eradication and actually visualized in a very explicit way that control, reducing disease and death, was actually on the path to eradication. And I think it's really important to retain this quote from the 69 Assembly because it remains hugely important for us today. The slides we also share these days, Bruno and myself, what was achieved in the 14 years of the eradication, indeed 15 countries and 1 territory achieved malaria elimination and were indeed certified. In the tail of the eradication campaign, a further 7 countries and 1 territory did eliminate malaria and got certified. And then we entered this long 20-year-old period where nothing happened. And as we know, malaria came back with a vengeance. Mortality and morbidity increased, and it took a huge effort to start reversing that. And the period 2007 to 2016, from the elimination perspective, starts witnessing this comeback. We used to say, even Melinda on her video says 5 countries. It's actually 7 countries, and admittedly she probably taped the video a month ago, because in the last month 2 further countries have been certified. The first one, and one which brings remarkable emotional notes to all of us, is Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is always mentioned as the case of a country that nearly achieved elimination. There were only 12 or 18 cases left, and the effort was stopped just before achieving success, and malaria came back again with a vengeance. 15 years ago, Sri Lanka had over 200,000 cases, and within just over a decade, they've managed to reach 0, sustain 0, and be certified by the Director General of WHO last September. In the last week, I believe, or 10 days, Kyrgyzstan has also been certified malaria-free. And so this reflects this remarkable progress that we've achieved over the last 15 years, what we often refer to as the unprecedented progress, with a 60% decrease in mortality globally in the at-risk population and 37% decrease in case incidence. And this has happened globally. This is the same figures for the different WHO regions. So the progress has not been in just one place, it's been throughout the malaria endemic world. And please also note the orange line to the left, the one that reaches 0, is for the first time last year, an entire WHO region achieved 0 malaria indigenous cases, the European region. And you would say, well, you know, the European region, that was to be expected. Well, actually, the Euro region contains all the ex-Soviet Central Asian republics that, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, saw a massive resurgence in malaria, and they have managed to reverse it, drive it down, and reach 0 cases, and the last countries are actually being certified. For the first time, an entire region is malaria-free. And not only has disease and death come down, but the number of countries with just a few cases has been increasing. The different blue graded lines represent the number of countries with less than 1,000 cases per year, less than 100 cases, and less than 10 cases. So a steady increase over the last 15 years in the number of countries with few malaria cases. In the face of this progress, last year, the World Health Assembly endorsed a new global technical strategy, the first strategy developed and endorsed by countries since the 1993 strategy on malaria control, which sets these goals, these milestones, and these ambitious targets of reducing disease and death by 2030 by over 90% and achieving elimination in at least 35 countries, under the vision of a world free of malaria. And again, this is significant. It's the third World Health Assembly resolution that speaks of a malaria-free world. And I will be coming back to this again. Beyond that, over the last few months, we've been looking at those countries with few malaria cases and trying to understand, both in projecting on the grounds of the decreasing slope of the last 10 years, projecting them forward, plus an assessment of operational feasibility and capacity by the country, which countries could actually achieve zero over the next 5 years. These are the countries with less than 100 cases. These are the ones with less than 1,000 cases, and these are the number of countries with less than 10,000 cases. And essentially, we published 3 or 4 months ago a report which suggests that actually 21 new countries could achieve zero cases by 2020, which is only 4 years ago. A sign of the growing momentum, as Bruno was saying, that countries and regions want to eliminate malaria and are moving forward in a very decisive way. The interesting thing about this list of 21 is that it actually speaks to all regions. It's not just the Americas, where probably the biggest contribution is going to take place. The Eastern Mediterranean region, including Iran and Saudi Arabia, Southeast Asia region, the Western Pacific, but also the African region. And here there are some, one would call some low-hanging fruits. Algeria, just 6 cases, and probably we're actually investigating that literally as we speak. Probably all imports, so Algeria may have actually already eliminated malaria. Botswana, very close. Cape Verde, we're talking of less than a handful of cases. Comoros. South Africa is going to be a challenge, but we believe it can be done, and the country has pledged to do it as well as Swaziland. So a large movement of countries throughout the world, throughout all the regions, aiming for elimination. Now, let me quickly move over to a few more generic principles that I believe we need to retain in this discussion. A lot of them inspired by Walter Doodle and his book on the principles of disease elimination and eradication. I believe they remain relevant to all of us. 3 indicators of primary importance as to whether a disease is eradicable or not. A, effective interventions are available to interrupt transmission of the agent. Are we there in malaria? Well, the fact is that a good number of countries, as we've just seen, have actually eliminated malaria with currently available tools. So the answer is probably yes, in a good number of places, perhaps not sufficient to achieve elimination in the hardest places, and therefore a renewed call for the essential work in R&D that needs to happen all along the process until eradication is achieved. The second principle is, are there practical diagnostic tools with sufficient sensitivity and specificity to detect levels of infections that can lead to transmission? Well, we actually have a problem still in terms of defining what parasite densities is transmission and how effective is it, but I'm sure a lot of work is going on there, and indeed new diagnostic tools are being developed, highly sensitive ones that may play a useful role. But once again, on the face of light microscopy and RDTs, elimination has been achieved in a number of places. And finally, humans are the essential for the life cycle of the agent, and there are no vertebrate reservoirs that do not amplify in the environment. That is true for 4 of the 5 species. Pinot-Lazy is a different it's a different issue. So I think on some of the key indicators, we are on reasonably good grounds, but no time for content, and more work needs to be done. Economic considerations that should be brought to the table. I think these are really important at the broader policy discussions, particularly thinking on the resources for elimination or eradication, and whether they should be used for this or for other non-health projects, alternative health interventions, continued control of the condition, or the eradication of other eradicable diseases or conditions. In other words, malaria does not live in isolation from a complex world with relatively finite resources where decisions need to be taken. Third category of social and political criteria. Malaria, in this case, should be a recognized public health recognized of public health importance with broad international appeal and be perceived as a worthy goal by all levels of society. And I think in that sense we are in not too bad ground. Secondly, a technically feasible intervention and eradication strategy. Again, countries have managed to eliminate malaria. A good number of them will be eliminating malaria in the next few years. Have we got all the strategies to address elimination in the hardest places? Probably not, and not because we don't have the tools or the strategies to achieve that. Thirdly, we must carve a broad international consensus. And I think we are on our way, but a lot more work needs to be happen. Consensus on the priority and justification for the disease. And this must be developed by technical experts, the decision makers, and the scientific community. And often our community is very good, because it's a lively and vibrant one, to engage in complex and at times futile discussions. Fourth, political commitment. And political commitment must be gained at the highest levels, following informed discussion at regional and local levels, and a clear commitment of resources from international sources is essential from the start. And I would add, of domestic resources. A resolution by the World Health Assembly is probably a vital booster. Now, on the political commitment, I think we often see, as Bruno mentioned, high-level declarations from high-level officials. But as we will be reporting on our World Malaria Report this year, domestic funding, Bruno alluded to overall funding for malaria has probably plateaued. What to me is a much more worrying fact that we are documenting this year is that domestic funding has remained stagnant over the last 10 years. And unless political commitment by the affected countries translates into domestic funding from the affected countries themselves that reflects true ownership of the elimination effort by the country itself, we won't be able to eradicate malaria. And we need an advocacy plan, and the eradication program must address the issues of equity and be supportive of broader goals that have a positive impact on the health infrastructure. To address some of these issues, WHO, with the support of partners, has established a strategic advisory group on malaria eradication at the request convened by the Global Malaria Program at the request of the Director General of WHO. The first meeting of this group, together with some of the WHO collaborating centers and key partners, took place on August the 28th, 2016. And broadly, this committee aims to analyze what future scenarios for malaria may look like, taking into consideration a broad set of biological, technical, socioeconomic, political, and environmental determinants, including potential products of innovation. We are all fully aware that the progress in the fight against malaria has not just been because of bed nets and ACTs. Economic and social development plays a critical role. The role of urbanization, electrification, mobility, many of those factors play on our favor in reducing malaria, but others do not. Having a broad understanding of those determinants, their potential impact in the coming years, and trying to understand where may we be by 2030, which if the GTS says we will be left with still 20 million malaria cases and somewhere around 20,000 deaths, will help us see if and when a further effort to launch an endgame may be reasonable. I won't dwell on malaria definitions, elimination and eradication, because this is an expert community, but believe me, there are still significant confusion out there around this. Among other things, because definitions do change. They were not the same as the time of the Global Malaria Eradication Program than they are now. What we now call elimination was then called eradication. And I think the current WHO terminology helps to sort that out. But in the face of SDG goals, ending malaria epidemics, and what does that actually mean, and how that does not equate to eradication, this clarification is often useful. From our strategic advisory group, a few initial thoughts that are emerging and that may be worth sharing with you, and many of them, again, have aligned with some of the comments of Bruno. The first one, which I think is important because it's a document that will be going forward to the Executive Board of the World Health Organization, is reaffirming the unequivocal commitment of the World Health Organization to malaria eradication. And this is not because me or any other member of the WHO says so, but because there have been by now 3 World Health Assembly resolutions, the 1955, the 1969, and the 2015, that equate eradication and the vision of a malaria-free world. A paper in that sense, as I say, is moving forward in our governing bodies for reaffirming this unequivocal role. There is no discussion, is WHO in favor or against eradication? We are unequivocally for eradication because that's what our strategy, as approved last year, calls for. Secondly, differentiating what at times is one of those unhelpful false dichotomies. Is eradication feasible? Well, from a biological point of view, there is no doubt. I'm sure everybody in this audience would agree to that. Is it operationally feasible? That's a different question. And that may be different in different parts of the world. So just using the term feasibility to relate to eradication is probably not a useful one, and we need to start separating one from the other. The third one is the recognition that we are moving towards eradication. We are moving towards a malaria free world. We're not in a campaign to eradicate malaria, but we are moving towards eradication. And probably we should use just the word campaign, if we ever use it, to refer to the end game, even when it is within reach and there's a specific time date where we believe it can be achieved and there is full funding and full technical capacity to achieve that goal. Third, or fourth, that achieving the ambitious goals of the global technical strategy is in the path to elimination. Or in other words, if we don't first reduce disease and death in a dramatic way, as is proposed by the GTS, we will not eliminate or we won't eradicate malaria. If we don't manage to eliminate malaria deaths, we shall not eradicate malaria. And therefore, a full support and moving forward with the GTS is on the path to elimination and eradication. In closing, elimination and eradication programs are laudable goals, but they carry with them an awesome responsibility. There is no room for failure. Careful and deliberate evaluation is a prerequisite before embarking on any such program. And worth reinstating once again that elimination and eradication are the ultimate goals of public health. The only question is whether these goals can be achieved today or it will take us 10 or 15 or 20 years. But the goal must be very clear. As I was asked to speak of history, let me end up with a quote from 1939 by the malariologist Boyd, which I think does capture very well where we need to be and how do we approach this goal of eradication. Malaria control should not, in other words, read now, malaria eradication should not be a campaign. It should be a policy, a long-term program. It cannot be accomplished or maintained by spasmodic efforts. It requires the adoption of a practical program, the reasonable continuity of which will be sustained for a long term of years. Thank you very much.
Yes, a little.